So today I want to go over a level 100 version of a Druid Pulverize build. And the best part about this build is you don't need any unique items to make the build actually work, and you only need one to make the build work optimally. And that unique is Vasili's Prayer, which your earth skills are now also werebear skills, and they also fortify you for a small amount. And the reason this is so important is because we're going to be in Grizzly Rage a lot of the time, and with this unique we're able to continue to use our Earth Spike generator and Earthen Bulwark while we're in Grizzly Rage. If you don't have this unique helmet, when you pop Grizzly Rage, you can't use Earthen Bulwark in it, which is a pretty decent defensive, but the main part is it's going to change your generator to Maul, which is a melee generator, which is much more clunky to use than our ranged generator. But you can still very much make this build work without Vasili's Prayer and having no uniques. But the primary thing this build is built around is the legendary aspect. The Pulverize creates a shockwave that travels forward, dealing up to 200% of its damage to targets in the path. And the reason this becomes so good is because our Pulverize, which is a core skill, meaning we can scale it quite a lot, becomes a big ranged attack that can basically clear out the entire screen of enemies. But this also causes Pulverize to have two different attacks. It has the normal Pulverize, which is a small AoE radius in front of you. Then you have the Pulverize Shockwave, and they're both considered two different attacks. So if you're in medium or close range with an enemy, you'll see the enemy get hit with two different damage amounts. The first being the normal Pulverize, and the second being the much higher damaging Pulverize Shockwave. And you want this aspect on your weapon because this is where a lot of your damage scaling is coming from, and this is what the entirety of the build is focused around. And then next up we have our skill tree, starting with our generator Earth Spike, and we do actually have to use this primarily for boss fights. It's just a ranged generator, very easy to use. Upgrade 1 has a chance to stun enemies. And I've recently taken out a point of Fierce Earth Spike, which just fortifies you when hitting CC'd enemies, but this build has so much fortified that I don't think I really need this. If you're having issues keeping yourself heavily fortified, you may want to put a point into this. But then we're going down and putting 5 points in a Pulverize, our main damaging ability, and we already went over how this works. Upgrade 1 causes guaranteed overpowers every 12 seconds that you remain healthy. This is just going to be pretty big damage bursts every 12 seconds. Upgrade 2, when you hit enemies, they deal 20% reduced damage for 4 seconds. So just a massive damage reduction, basically 100% of the time on our main damaging ability. Then we're going down to our defensives, taking Earthen Bulwark, which is mainly just a barrier proc, but upgrade 1 also makes us unstoppable, and it's always good to have more ways to become unstoppable. And I've recently also taken a point out of upgrade 2 because it's just more fortifying, and we already have way too much fortifying. But again, if you're having issues keeping very high fortify, you can also take this upgrade as well. Then we're going down and taking Debilitating Roar, just a massive damage reduction to all enemies around you. Upgrade 1 fortifies you quite a bit. Upgrade 2 heals you every second it's active. And since we have quite a lot of health in this build, this is a very good heal to keep us topped up a lot of the time. Then we're going down and taking Trample, one of our main movement ability. Also makes us unstoppable, which is very good, and it can deal some pretty decent damage. Upgrade 1 deals more damage the less enemies it hit, can actually deal some decent damage on, say, a boss. Then upgrade 2, I'm taking Savage Trample, which gives us 20 spirit when we use Trample. And I'm mainly using this because you use Trample so much to move around while in between fights, so I want to keep my spirit topped off as much as possible. And the other option is just to give us more Fortify, which we don't really need. And you generate quite a lot of spirit doing this over, say, a nightmare dungeon run. So I think this feels much better to get that spirit than to just fortify more that you probably don't need. Then we're going down taking Grizzly Rage, which just basically buffs everything. Upgrade 1 makes us unstoppable while it's active. Upgrade 2 fortifies you every second it's active. So just basically a massive buff to everything in our build. Then our capstone is Earthen Might. It's a lucky hit that when it procs, it restores all of your spirit and causes all of your attacks to be guaranteed crits for the next 5 seconds. And the chance for this to proc is doubled on critical strikes or if the target is stunned, immobilized, or knocked back. This is one of the main ways how we regenerate a lot of spirit, and when this procs, it doubles the chance to re-proc it for the next 5 seconds because all of our attacks are crit. Anytime this procs, it's just a massive damage increase. And then next up we have our passives. One into Heart of the Wild, mainly to get these other passives. Abundance, basic skills generate 18% more spirit. Very good to make sure we can top ourselves up very quickly. Then Wild Impulses, your core skills cost more spirit but deal quite a lot more damage. I also have 3 on my necklace from this, and this is one of the places I really want to change. I want this off my necklace to put it to somewhere else, because I think even even though this is a pretty good passive, I think this generally ends up hurting us on more single target fights because we just use so much of our spirit so quickly. Still a good passive and still a decent roll on your necklace, but I think there's better rolls. Then we're going down, taking Predatory Instinct, increased critical strike chance to close enemies. A lot of enemies that are going to stay alive will end up getting close to you, so more critical strike chance when they get close is very good. Then 3 into Iron Fur, we have reduced damage while in Werebear. We're almost always in Werebear. Then we're going down, taking 1 into Ancestral Fortitude, increases non-physical resistances, which aren't very good, but this is primarily to get Vigilance. You gain damage reduction for 6 seconds after using a defensive skill. We have 2 defensive skills, and this lasts for 6 seconds, so it's quite a big damage reduction. And this is another place I've put some additional points from removing some of our skill upgrades. Then 3 into Nature's Reach, deal 9% increased damage to distant enemies, doubled if they are CC'd, and we're slowing 100% of the enemies we hit, so this is just a massive damage increase for any distant enemies. Then we're going down, putting 3 into Crushing Earth, you deal more damage to CC'd enemies, so this is just a massive damage increase at all times. Critical strikes with Earth skills will fortify you for quite a lot, one of the reasons we don't need so much fortify in the build. Then 3 into Stone Guard, while you have Fortify for over 50% of your maximum life, your Earth skills deal more damage. This is basically going to be 100% of the time as well. Then we're going down, 3 points into Defiance, nature skills deal more damage to elites. That's all of our damage. 3 into Circle of Life, your nature skills that consume spirit heal you for 3% of your maximum life. Anytime we pulverize, we're now healing for quite a bit, and this is going to be where quite a lot of our healing comes from. Then 3 into Nature's Disaster, your Earth skills deal more damage to vulnerable enemies, and we're making enemies vulnerable the first time we hit every single enemy, so it's going to help us burst down enemies quite a bit. Next up, we have our Spirit Boons, Wariness to take damage reduction from elites, always going to be good. Then I'm taking the increased critical strike chance from the Eagle. You can also switch this to the 10% maximum life if you want, just depending on what content you're doing. If you want more damage, take the critical strike chance. If you want more survivability, take the increased life. Then Calamity, extend the duration of ultimate skills by 25%. Grizzly Rage is incredibly important for the build, so more duration, always good. Then Obsidian Slam, every 20th kill will cause your next Earth skill to overpower. This is very good in AoE situations. You can clear out a whole screen with Pulverize, and then your next Pulverize is a guaranteed overpower. Pretty big damage increases. Then one of the most important parts of the build, Calm Before the Storm, a lucky hit, nature skills that have up to a 10% chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate skill by 2 seconds. We want to be in Grizzly Rage as long as humanly possible, and this is going to help us do that. And then next up we have our Paragon Boards, and like normal, I'm primarily going to be going through the glyphs, the board selection, and some more notable rare nodes. I will have a build planner in the description if you want to see all the points and how I use them. Just a little bit too tedious to go over all of that in the video. So the glyph on the starting board is going to be Spirit, increase critical strike damage with our core skills for all dexterity within range. Then the secondary is critical strikes, increase the damage enemies take from you for 2% up to 12% for 20 seconds. So if enemies survive a long time, they're taking more and more damage, and then just massive critical strike damage increase with our core skills. Then we're going up, in the first board we're taking is Survival Instinct. While in Werebear form, you deal increased damage up to 50% for every percent difference in current life between you and your enemy. So say if you're at 100% life, the more damage you do to that enemy, so the lower their health gets, the more damage you're going to be dealing to them. Then the glyph on this board is going to be Earth and Sky, gives a bonus to all magic nodes within range, and the secondary is nature skills deal 10% increased damage to crowd control and vulnerable enemies. And like a lot of the skills on the Paragon board, this is multiplicative, so it's doing a lot more increased damage than you think, and you want to get most of the magic nodes on this board because that's going to give us a lot of increased damage while in Werebear form and some increase to total armor while in Werebear form. Then we're going over to the left and we're getting the Earthen Devastation board. Your Earth skills deal increased damage to enemies affected by crowd control or multiplicative scaling. That's going to be active majority of the time. And then we're taking Werebear. You deal increased damage while in Werebear form for everything in range. This is the only glyph of mine that's not actually maxed out, so it's going to be dealing more damage once this is maxed out, but massive damage increase. Then the secondary effect is you take reduced damage while in Werebear form, both very good. Then we're going over to the left and we're taking the Ancestral Guidance node. After spending 75 spirit, you deal 30% increased damage for 5 seconds. This is going to be active quite a lot of the time while in combat. And the other thing we're taking, which is one of the most notable rare and magic nodes within our boards, is Reclamation. This gives 2 spirit on kill. Everything you kill gives 2 spirit. Then 2 of these magic nodes also give an additional 1 spirit on kill. So if you get all 3 of these, you're getting 4 spirit every single kill. This is one of the big ways you can basically have infinite spirit if you're in AoE situations. That's the only things you're getting off that board. So then we're going to go back to our other board and go up one, and we're going to be taking the inner beast board, but we're not taking the legendary node. And then we're going to be having the undaunted glyph. You deal increased damage while fortified, so just a massive damage increase at all times. And this is giving almost a 100% increase to damage, basically 100% of the time. Then the secondary is you take damage reduction the more fortify you have, so this is just going to be 10% damage reduction, basically all of the time as well. Then we're going over to the left and we're taking the exploit node, increased damage to vulnerable enemies, but the primary thing is a secondary effect. When an enemy is damaged by you, they become vulnerable for 3 seconds, has a 20-second cooldown per enemy. This is the main way we're applying vulnerable to enemies. And this is very bursty because we hit a pulverize, it'll apply vulnerable to the entire screen of enemies. You pulverize again, you're going to be dealing massively increased damage to all those enemies. And if you're lower level, take the exploit glyph much more early on. So say if you're like level 60 or 70, you're going to want to put the exploit glyph in one of your first glyph slots, because the secondary effect of it to apply vulnerable is one of the most important effects of any of the glyphs we're currently using. So earlier on, make this one of your first glyphs you want to be using. But that's pretty much the entirety of the board. All the other rare nodes you can check in the build planner and in the description, but basically just take anything that's going to be good for you. Max life, increase nature magic damage, increase damage to elites, damage to crowd controlled enemies, and you're basically taking most rare nodes you're coming across while going through all of these different boards. Most of them are worth picking up if you come across them. And for our gems, we want critical strike damage to crowd controlled enemies in our weapon. After we hit enemies, they're always going to be crowd controlled. In our armor, we want damage reduction while fortified. We're fortified 100% of the time. This is just massive damage reduction. In our jewelry, we want increased armor, so just more damage reduction. And then as we already went over, you don't need any uniques, but the primary one you're going to want is Vasili's Prayer. This is going to be very good so we can use our earth skills while in Grizzly Rage, and this is going to help us stay fortified even more. The rolls on this are also decent-ish. Lightning resistance kind of useless, but the other rolls are decent. And optimally, that's really the only unique you're going to want to be using. Now, if you want a little bit more of a speed farming build, you can use the unique on your chest piece that makes you always in werebear and gives you +2 ranks to all werebear skills. But I think with a pulverized build, a legendary with some damage reduction rolls are generally better than that unique, even for speed farming, just because you can clear out entire screens anyway. And for speed farming, this build is primarily held back by movement speed. But that brings us to our legendary aspects. We already went over our pulverized aspect that the build is focused around. That goes on your two-handed weapon, and you're going to want a two-handed weapon, primarily a staff if you can get it. I definitely need a better roll for mine right now, but that's the main thing the build is built around. Then on our necklace, your core skills deal up to 60% increased damage based on your amount of fortify, and we're going to be fortified so much, so this is just massive damage increase for our core skills. This is also multiplicative scaling, so this is much more important than you actually realize. Then on our ring, we have Pulverize is now an earth skill, and after casting Pulverize, it leaves down some tectonic plates that deal some damage over time. And the extra damage over time is nice and deals a decent bit of damage, but we primarily want this so Pulverize is an earth skill, because then we have a ton of additional effects that scale with our earth skills. This is also how we make Pulverize a nature skill, and we have a ton of nature scaling. And then our other ring, we have restore up to 4 of your primary resource when you crowd control an enemy, and basically everything we hit is going to get crowd controlled, so we're going to be restoring spirit on basically every single hit. And this is one of the most important legendaries to get a good roll on, because if you get a roll that's restore 1 spirit for crowd controlled enemy, that's going to be so much less spirit gained than getting a roll of 4. So this is one of the most important legendary rolls. Then on our gloves, the duration of Grizzly Rage is increased by 5 seconds. In addition, every time you critically strike, you gain a stack in critical strike damage when Grizzly Rage is active. And you'll start to notice this quite a lot, that when you're in Grizzly Rage, you'll be constantly critting, and your crits will just keep going up and up and up. You'll be dealing some pretty massive damage later on in Grizzly Rage. Then on our chest piece, basic skills, grand damage reduction for up to 6 seconds. This is very good, just more damage reduction. And even though we don't use our basic skill quite a lot, this ends up being really good, because if you're in the situation that you actually need to use your basic skill, meaning you're not killing a lot of enemies, something's probably staying alive and constantly hitting you, meaning you want damage reduction. Then on our legs, we have the stacking armor increase. This is just incredibly good for getting massive physical damage reduction, and I can get up to I think like 99% physical damage reduction when this is fully stacked, so basically maxed out armor, and this will just allow you some massive damage reduction overall. Then on our boots, we have damaging from earth skills slows enemies by up to 50% for 5 seconds. Now the roll on this really doesn't matter. We primarily want this for it just applying slow, which is another crowd control, which causes a ton of other effects to proc, and since our Pulverize is an earth skill, everything we hit gets slowed instantly. Now the rolls on my items are primarily what I want to start changing up quite a bit, and more specifically on my jewelry. Percentage willpower is good, spirit cost reduction is good, ranks to wild impulses is decent, but there are better rolls, primarily looking at crushing earth, which earth skills deal increased damage to CC'd enemies. One of those is being slow, so we hit an enemy, then we're doing increased damage to them. That's a much better roll for our necklace than wild impulses. And I currently also have 3 ranks to rate skills, which affect our trample, but isn't that important. So some of the other good rolls are that ranks to crushing earth, and then something like damage reduction while fortified would be much better. On our rings, I definitely want to change these up a bit, and some of the primary rolls are max life, lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, and then something like vulnerable damage, but some other good rolls are physical damage, critical strike with earth skills, and then just critical strike damage. But I do want to change up my rings pretty heavily because the best rolls are vulnerable damage, lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, and maximum life. If you have those 4 rolls, that's basically the best ring you're going to want. And then for your weapon, you're going to want a staff because its base roll is damage to crowd controlled enemies, very good, and it rolls pretty high. Then on the weapon itself, I have decent rolls on this. Critical strike damage with earth skills is decent, damage to slowed enemies is good, damage to distant enemies is good. I recently changed this one up because I think damage to distant enemies is much better than you would normally think, just because of how easily you can clear out screens and how long your Pulverize has in range. Then more damage to crowd control is always going to be a pretty big roll, but some other rolls are willpower is very good, damage with core skills is probably one of the ones I want, and then vulnerable damage is also going to be pretty good. There's actually quite a lot of rolls that are good for your weapon. Boots, you want spirit cost reduction, movement speed, willpower is good, fortified generation really isn't that good. I would primarily want a dodge chance on that fortify roll instead. Then for our legs, you're just going to want all the damage reduction you can get. Total armor while in werebear is one of the important ones. Damage reduction while fortified is really good. Total armor is really good. Damage reduction is really good. Then there's all the other damage reductions. Damage reductions from distant enemies, damage reduction from close enemies. Basically anything that's going to make you much more tanky, you want on your legs. On your gloves, ranks to Pulverize is going to be really good. Critical strike chance is good. Critical strike damage with earth skills is always going to be pretty good. And then I do want a lucky hit chance roll on this, so I'd primarily want these gloves, just the overpower would be lucky hit chance instead. Then on our chest piece, and you want these basically the same as your legs, all things that are going to make you more tanky. Maximum life is a decent roll, total armor percent's really good, damage reduction while fortified is really good, damage reduction from distant enemies is really good, and then there's also things like damage reduction from close enemies. Anything that's going to make you tanky, exactly like the legs, you want on your chest piece. Then on our helmet, we're using Vasili's Prayer, so you can't roll this with anything, and that's the entirety of this build. A very strong build for how simple it is to use and for how simple it is to gear, because you only really need that one unique item. And those are some of the reasons why this is one of, if not the most popular Druid build. It's just so good for farming because you can clear out entire screens easily, super tanky, and this has the potential to do much higher nightmare dungeons, but that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.
Wait a moment.